Welcome to the deep dive. Today, our mission is pretty straightforward. We're offering you a powerful shortcut to understanding some of the most ruthless and, well, timeless mechanics of influence and power.
These are strategies that have shaped courts and conflicts for millennia.
Exactly. And whether you want to play the game or you just want to see the board more clearly, this kind of knowledge is, well, it's paramount.
We're opening a manual for the strategically minded today. We're diving into excerpts from Robert Greene's monumental work, The 48 Laws of Power. And, this is not light reading.
Not at all.
It's a really unsentimental look at human history, drawing lessons from figures. I mean, everyone from Julius Caesar to the chillingly composed Talleyrand.
And the text itself, it was inspired by these discussions Greene had in Venice. It's fundamentally built on the insights of Machiavelli. The whole idea that power and politics operate in a realm totally separate from conventional morality.
That is the core takeaway. And our goal here is strictly analytical. We want to isolate the psychological mechanisms, the strategic principles laid out in the text.
We're looking for the pure nuggets of knowledge.
Right, about how influence and deception and, their pursuit of control actually operate when you strip away that polite veneer of fairness.
And that philosophical backdrop is what makes this so challenging, I think. The book argues that, while society promotes virtue on the surface, these dark, primal emotions, envy, greed, lust for control, they're still the real drivers.
The game never changes.
Just the setting.
Exactly. And it forces us to confront this reality that to navigate the game successfully, you really have to master indirection. It's that classic advice from Napoleon. Place your iron hand inside a velvet glove.
Make people bend to your will so subtly they don't even realize it's happening.
And they don't resist. And it all begins, really, with controlling your presence, your appearance.
Okay, let's unpack that foundation then. If the power game is rooted in this kind of realism, the very first step is controlling how you are perceived. The text is insistent on this. In the court of public opinion, perception just. It completely replaces reality.
It's the ultimate smokescreen. And Law 6 really drives this point home. Court attention at all cost. If you are just buried in the crowd, you're invisible. And what's unseen, literally, it counts for nothing.
So you have to stand out. But that immediately brings up a question for me. Is it better to be genuinely brilliant but ignored, or strategically conspicuous, even if you're just average?
Well, the classic example cited is the huge difference between Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla.
Right.
This is a perfect modern case study in sort of personal branding and strategic presentation. Tesla, intellectually, he may have been the more profound scientist, but his name holds so much less cultural weight than Edison's.
And that's all down to showmanship.
It's entirely due to showmanship. Edison understood that spectacle was a component of power.
So how did he do that? How did he turn his work into a spectacle?
Well, he designed his experiments to be visually dazzling for reporters. He wasn't just talking about a light bulb. He was projecting these fantastic future inventions robots, machines that could photograph thought.
Things he had no intention of actually building?
Not at the time, no. He was selling a fantasy of limitless progress that was tied directly to his name, his image. He generated this massive conversation, this awe, that was often completely separate from the immediate, tangible result.
He was managing the narrative. This feels so modern. I mean, you think of tech CEOs today who spend more time crafting some controversial presence on social media than they do actually coding.
It's the exact same mechanism. And the lengths Edison went to, they're astonishing. For instance, in 1915, there was a rumor that he and Tesla were up for a joint Nobel Prize.
What happened?
Well, the prize went elsewhere in the end, but sources indicated Edison had been approached, and he flat out refused to share the attention with Tesla.
He would rather forfeit the prize than dilute the spotlight.
That refusal shows a deep, almost instinctual understanding that fame is a resource. And he wanted his image to be unique, untainted by an association with a rival. Power often lives in that perceived uniqueness, not in shared excellence.
So what if brilliant attention isn't available? The law suggests that, controversy works just as well. Notoriety of any kind gets you visibility.
And visibility brings power. The book talks about Pietro Aretino, a young man of low birth in 16th century Rome. He needed fame, and he needed it instantly.
So how do you do that? How do you go from total obscurity to being on everyone's lips overnight?
You pick a fight with someone famous. Aretino published these scathing satirical poems ridiculing the Pope, and specifically the Pope's beloved pet elephant.
An elephant, that's a bold target.
It was a brilliant strategic choice. He attacked a powerful institution through a completely ridiculous symbol. The scandal was immediate, and it ensured his name was suddenly everywhere. That gave him the starting currency of visibility, which he then leveraged into this incredibly lucrative career.
So if gaining attention is law 6, then law 4 is the crucial counterbalance. Once you have that attention, you can't just destroy your own mystique by talking too much.
Yes, which brings us to Law 4. Always say less than necessary. This is a really sophisticated lesson in strategic reserve.
What did that give you practically?
Well, by speaking less, you do 3 things. First, you dramatically reduce the risk of saying something foolish or, worse, dangerous. Second, you make yourself impossible to read, which increases the perception of mystery. And third, you force other people to project meaning and depth onto your silence.
If you're an open book, you're predictable. And predictability can breed contempt or just boredom. But reserve inspires respect, even fear.
And the story of the Decemberist uprising leader, Kondraty Ryleyev, it's a catastrophic example of what happens when you throw that away.
Right, this was in 1825.
Yes. Ryleyev is sentenced to death by Tsar Nicholas I. He's on the gallows, the noose is on, the trapdoor opens, and the rope breaks. Ryleyev falls to the ground.
And in that era, that was seen as a sign, right? Divine intervention.
Huge superstition around it. It often meant a pardon. He had this miraculous second chance, a real twist of fortune.
But his mouth sealed his fate.
It did. In this misplaced moment of, I guess, victorious relief, Ryleyev just yells out to the crowd. You see, in Russia, they don't know how to do anything properly, not even how to make rope.
Wow. That moment of fatal honesty, why was that so damaging?
Because it turned a moment of potential divine favor into open mockery of the Tsar's competence, of the state itself. He just threw away any respect his silence might have earned him.
And the Tsar couldn't afford to look weak.
Exactly. So he immediately ordered a fresh rope, and Ryleyev was executed seconds later. The lesson is chilling. In these power dynamics, honesty, especially that kind of emotional, unguarded honesty, it's just a blunt instrument that harms the person wielding it.
And if verbal reserve is law 4, then law 3, conceal your intentions, is the physical version of that strategy. It's the art of using decoys and red herrings in your actions.
If your opponents even have a hint of your true intentions, they can prepare, they can mount a defense, neutralize your advantage. You have to envelop them in such a thick smokescreen that by the time they see your real goal, it's already too late.
Otto von Bismarck, the Iron Chancellor, he was a master of this. This is the man who defined Prussian might with iron and blood. But at a key moment, he did the absolute opposite of what everyone expected.
He desperately needed to delay a war so Prussia could prepare its military. So to do this, he gives this famous speech in Parliament where he completely reverses his public stance.
He starts praising the enemy, Austria.
Yes, and defending their actions, condemning the idea of war. He asks the legislators, with this false emotion, if they could really face the crippled and grieving fathers.
So he put on the mask of a pacifist.
It was pure strategic insincerity, and the effect was stunning. He shocked his own supporters and totally confused his opponents. By appearing to be against the very war he secretly wanted, he concealed his purpose, averted the conflict, and got the time he needed. The deception worked precisely because it ran so counter to his established reputation.
We see a similar, though maybe more personal, kind of deception with Haile Selassie of Ethiopia and the provincial ruler Balcha. Selassie had this image of being a gentle, almost passive ruler.
And Balcha was a deeply suspicious man. He was fully aware of the political games. Selassie needed to neutralize him, but Balcha always traveled with this massive personal bodyguard. He was convinced a banquet Selassie arranged was a trap.
And Selassie just played right into that suspicion.
He did. Instead of trying to calm his fears, Selassie welcomed him to the palace, let Balcha bring his entire bodyguard inside, gave him high ceremonial honor. So Balcha, convinced he had anticipated the trap poison assassination, something in the dining hall, he focused all his energy on his immediate personal safety at the feast.
The banquet itself became the perfect decoy.
The perfect smokescreen. While Balcha was mentally locked into guarding his own plate at the palace, Selassie's main force was miles away, blocking all the roads Balcha's own army would use to support him.
Checkmate.
Total checkmate. When Balcha later tried to leave the capital, thinking he was safe, he found his escape routes were completely cut off. Selassie directed his enemy's paranoia right where he wanted it, away from the real strategic action.
That is a masterful understanding of controlling an opponent's anxiety.
Well, once you've mastered that outward presentation, you have to address the architecture of your relationships. In this world, relationships with those above you, beside you, against you, they have to be viewed through a lens of strategic utility, not pure affection.
Let's start at the top then. This is maybe the most famous and dangerous one. Law 1, never outshine the master. It demands a strategic humility that feels so counterintuitive to anyone who's competitive.
It requires a suppression of the ego, yes. The core principle is that you have to make those above you feel comfortably superior. If you display your talents too aggressively, even if you're trying to impress them, you just inspire fear, insecurity, and then a desire to remove you.
The constant fear of being replaced. The boss might praise your brilliant work in public, but in private, they start seeing you as a threat to their own position.
Absolutely. The master is always sensitive to any threat to their light. Galileo understood this perfectly when he was seeking the position of court philosopher for Cosimo II, the Grand Duke of Tuscany.
Right, Galileo's background was in science, invention. Why did he change his approach for this?
He realized that just presenting a new gadget or a new scientific discovery would only glorify him. He had to strategically redirect that glory, so he stopped focusing on the science itself, and he linked his discoveries, his observation of the moons of Jupiter, directly to the Medicis.
He named them the Medicean stars.
Exactly. He realized masters don't care about the objective truth of the cosmos. They care about their name, their legacy. By linking the Medici name with cosmic forces, he was giving the Duke infinitely more glory. He made Cosimo look like the source of the brilliance, not just a patron of a brilliant scientist.
The goal is always to enhance the master's image, not your own. There's that brutal quote from Balthazar Gracian in the book.
Gracian stated it plainly. The superiority of a subject over his prince is not only stupid, it is fatal. He uses the analogy of the cosmos. Stars are visible, but they never appear in the sun's company. If you are as brilliant as the authority, you have to make sure you're always reflecting their light, not generating your own.
Okay, so from the master, we move to peers. And this is where Law 2, never put too much trust in friends, learn how to use enemies, just flies in the face of everything we're taught socially.
It does. But the law argues that friendship is dangerous because it's built on a lack of professional reserve and way too much easy trust. Friends, because of their familiarity, are the easiest people to arouse to envy. They see your success up close and often feel they deserve it more.
There's that story of Michael III, the Byzantine emperor, and his best friend Basilius. Michael was young and needed a trusted advisor, so he chose his best friend, who was just the head of the royal stables.
Michael made the fatal mistake of thinking that gratitude was a solid foundation for power. He showered Basilius with wealth, position, everything. But as Basilius got used to the power, he started to feel, as the book says, encumbered by the charity he had received.
The gratitude it curdled into resentment.
And ambition. He forgot the favors and started to believe his success was his own merit. He saw a monster his friend had created. The result: Basilius stabbed Michael III to death and paraded his head on a pike.
That's a grim lesson.
The lesson is that using friends often lacks the underlying fear or professionalism required for stability. Familiarity makes betrayal easier. They know all your weaknesses.
So if friends are too risky, the counterintuitive advice is to hire a former enemy. Why would an enemy be more reliable?
Because they have something to prove. And they understand the risk of crossing you again. Their loyalty is often born from necessity and fear, which are, far more dependable political motivators than fickle affection.
Mao Zedong used this on a huge strategic level during the Chinese Civil War. When the Japanese invaded in 1937, a lot of his communist leaders wanted to stop fighting the nationalists and just recuperate.
But Mao saw the conflict itself as a resource.
Yeah.
He disagreed. He viewed the Japanese threat, this massive, formidable enemy, as the perfect training for his ragtag communist army. By fighting the Japanese, his soldiers gained crucial high-stakes combat experience.
He turned an enemy into an unintended drill master.
Precisely. By the time the Japanese retreated, the communists had a battle-hardened army that was ready to finally defeat the nationalists. He didn't just survive the enemy, he leveraged their existence to forge his own force.
This brings us to a key element of maintaining power, which is Law 11. Learn to keep people dependent on you. You mentioned reverse independence earlier. I want to fully unpack that.
Reverse independence is that state of being so needed, so wanted, that their need for your unique contribution grants you immense freedom. The more indispensable you make yourself, the more leverage you have. The law is clear. Never teach them enough that they can do without you.
And the greatest example of this, using fear of loss, is from King Louis XI, the Spider King, and his astrologer. Louis was perpetually suspicious and threatened to execute him.
The astrologer was brilliant. He understood the king's deepest insecurity was his own mortality. So to save himself, he didn't beg or plead. He made up a prophecy. He told Louis that he had foreseen his own death, just 3 days before your majesty.
That's an incredible piece of psychological judo. It weaponized the king's self-interest against his own paranoia.
Instantly. Louis, terrified by the prospect of dying right after his astrologer, immediately spared his life. He not only protected the astrologer, he lavished him with gifts. The astrologer became indispensable for the king's own peace of mind. He was untouchable, not because the king liked him, but because the king needed him for his own perceived survival.
That is reverse independence. And we see Bismarck applying this on a bigger scale, politically.
Bismarck was an invaluable strategic asset. When dealing with King Frederick and later King William, he would repeatedly make it clear that if he didn't get what he wanted, he would simply resign. He would leave them to deal with the political crises alone,
Forcing them to choose between their pride and total political chaos.
and they always chose stability. They were dependent on Bismarck's unique ability to navigate that complex political landscape. They had to dance to Bismarck's tune because the cost of him leaving was far greater than the cost of just giving him what he wanted.
So true power isn't just in command, but in being the only one who can solve the problem.
Exactly. When we move beyond managing these relationships, we get into the realm of true strategic mastery. This is about controlling the tempo, the very structure of events themselves, so you're not just reacting, you're driving the entire sequence.
That immediately makes me think of Law 29, plan all the way to the end. We get so focused on the next win, the next milestone, we forget to visualize the end game, including the new problems that success will create.
The ending is the only thing that matters. If you plan for that final capture of glory, you are far less likely to be overwhelmed by, twists of fortune. It means mapping out all possible consequences, including the predictable human ones like envy.
The tragic story of Vasco Núñez de Balboa is a perfect illustration of this. Balboa was an outlaw in 1513, and he desperately needed a huge victory to get a reprieve from the Spanish king.
So he leads this incredibly arduous expedition across the jungles of Panama to become the first European to see the Pacific Ocean. He claims all the lands for Spain. That was his moment of triumph. But he only had a handful of exhausted men left.
And his fatal flaw wasn't a military mistake, it was a failure of strategic foresight.
Yes. He decided the priority was to go back for reinforcements and send some jewels to the king as proof. He got the reprieve he wanted, but he failed to anticipate the inevitable next step. The arrival of Governor Pedrarius, a deeply envious and ambitious rival sent by the king in the meantime.
Balboa assumed his grand discovery bought him safety.
Instead, Pedrarius saw Balboa's success as a direct threat to his own ambition. Balboa thought the end goal was seeing the ocean. Pedrarius proved the end goal is always neutralizing your rivals. Pedrarius eventually had Balboa executed. His failure was stopping the plan too soon.
From planning the end, we move to controlling the journey itself, which is Law 31. Control the options. Get others to play with the cards you deal. Creating a situation where the victim feels like they're choosing, but every choice serves your purpose.
You put them on the horns of a dilemma. The choices are managed. Ivan the Terrible used this after a serious illness. He realized the boyars, the Russian nobility, had gained way too much power while he was vulnerable.
He didn't just order a purge. He staged a dramatic exit.
It was a manufactured crisis. Ivan suddenly loads his treasures onto hundreds of sleds, leaves Moscow without a word, and refuses to return. A month later, a letter arrives saying he's abdicated because he can't bear the boyars' corruption anymore.
So he forced the people of Moscow into an impossible choice.
An impossible choice. They were terrified of being abandoned to the bloodthirsty and chaotic boyars who they hated even more than Ivan. They begged him to return, choosing his predictable tyranny over the terror of the nobility.
And he came back on his own terms.
Only on the condition that he be granted absolute, unchallenged power to deal with the boyars as he saw fit. He used a crisis he created to secure the ultimate legal leverage.
We see the same kind of controlled options in social dynamics. With the 17th century French courtesan, Ninon de l'Enclos, she structured her relationships so that even her lover's supposed freedom benefited her.
Ninon was brilliant. She eliminated the emotional chaos by structuring the options. Her system gave her lovers a sense of masculine pride and freedom while ensuring her own stability.
Mm.
Men could be payers, paying generously for her lifestyle, sleeping with her only when she chose, or they could be martyrs, enjoying her company without payment, always hoping to someday become her favorite.
And both categories served her completely. The payers funded her, and the martyrs provided social validation without draining her resources.
Exactly. She dealt the cards. The men felt they were choosing their role, but both paths channeled their energy and resources directly to her benefit.
Moving to execution, there's Law 30. Make your accomplishments seem effortless. This is the whole idea of sprezzatura.
Sprezzatura, it's the art of making something difficult look ridiculously easy, like it was done with a casual air. When you reveal the hours of practice, the clever tricks, you just reduce yourself to a technician. What's understandable is never awe-inspiring.
Right, there's this primitive awe that comes from believing something is pure genius, not just grunt work.
And Houdini was the master of this. When his rival Clopini claimed Houdini used gadgets and planned to expose him by choosing a specific combination lock, cuff a cuff, Clopini had the secret code word for Houdini had to execute this multi-layered deception.
So Clopini thought he was dealing the cards.
But Houdini had his own spies. He learned Clopini's plan and practiced for weeks. On stage, he let Clopini choose the cuffs. Then, during a quick, staged scuffle, Houdini deftly changed the lock's combination to spell out F-R-A-U-D.
So Clopini was locked in by his own cleverness, and the audience just saw Houdini solve an impossible puzzle on the spot.
They saw effortless genius and the total humiliation of the rival. They didn't see the weeks of practice, the counter-espionage. Houdini also deliberately dragged out the escape, increasing the audience's anxiety, all while he appeared perfectly calm. That composure just heightened the illusion of supernatural ease.
And that composure under pressure, especially when the enemy is flailing, that's Law 39. Stir up waters to catch fish.
Emotion is always strategically counterproductive. Anger, frustration, panic. They just cut off your options. Conversely, if you can deliberately provoke your enemies into anger while you stay calm, you gain a huge advantage. You force them to make mistakes by finding that chink in their vanity.
The perfect clash of this is the famous confrontation between Napoleon and his minister Talleyrand.
Napoleon suspected Talleyrand's loyalty, and he tried to provoke him publicly in front of the whole court. He announced that treason has begun when they permit themselves to doubt, and listed all of Talleyrand's supposed crimes. He was baiting him.
Trying to get him to confess or plead or just show fear. And what was Talleyrand's response?
Calculated indifference. Talleyrand just leaned on the mantelpiece, looking utterly bored, unfazed. When Napoleon pushed him, Talleyrand just smiled, calm and cool.
And the sight of that, his target being totally unaffected, pushed Napoleon over the edge.
He completely lost control. Napoleon, the conqueror of Europe, just starts screaming at Talleyrand, calling him a coward, a man of no faith. By staying composed, Talleyrand forced Napoleon to humiliate himself, to reveal his own emotional instability in front of everyone. He won a profound, silent victory just by refusing to take the bait.
Okay, the next set of laws moves into some really sophisticated and, let's be honest, often cynical territory, exploiting human weakness, vanity, ego, all through indirection. We start with Law 21. Play sucker to cash a sucker, then she seemed dumber than your mark.
This law exploits the universal vanity around intelligence. I mean, no one really minds if you're richer than them, but almost everyone is sensitive about being smarter. The key is to make your victim feel superior, more sophisticated, so they lower their guard and never suspect you have an ulterior motive.
The Great Diamond Hoax of the 1870s is the ultimate example of this. These prospectors, Arnold and Slack, fooled some of the wealthiest, sharpest financiers in New York.
They present themselves as completely naive hayseeds, just simpletons from the backwoods. They brought the financiers, including Louis Genin, the country's most brilliant mining expert, to a site they had secretly planted with gems.
And the experts, convinced of their own urban sophistication, never suspected these two simple men were capable of such an audacious fraud.
They just looked down on them. That vanity, that belief that we're too brilliant to be tricked by two bumpkins, it blinded them completely. They dug up the planted gems, and Genin declared it the richest field in history. The deception wasn't based on complex geology. It was based on exploiting the victim's own ego.
When you seem harmlessly stupid, people let you into their confidence.
They assume you can't possibly be a strategic threat.
So moving from vanity to desire, we get to Law 32. Play to people's fantasies. This outlines the magnetic power of appealing to unrealistic dreams instead of harsh truths.
Life is generally hard. It's frustrating. People will flock to anyone who can manufacture romance or conjure up instant success, provide a fantasy that overrides the unpleasant reality. If you appeal to truth, you just risk their anger when they feel disenchanted.
And this brings us back to 16th century Venice, which was in this devastating decline. It was the perfect stage for someone like Count Bragadino.
Venice needed a miracle, and Bragadino arrives, this mysterious, imposing figure funded by the Republic itself, living in luxury. His appeal was potent because it was tailored directly to their desperation. He promised a sudden recovery of past glories through the miracle of alchemy.
He wasn't advocating for sound governance or hard work. He was promising an overnight transformation, saying he could multiply the state's gold 30 times over.
He fulfilled their desire for an oasis in the desert. He was selling them the dream that the laws of reality could be suspended. People will follow the fantasy, however absurd, if the truth is just too painful to bear.
Now for what might be the subtlest and most powerful form of control. Law 43. Work on the hearts and minds of others. Seduction, not coercion.
Coercion creates a force that inherently works against you. It breeds hate and resistance that will eventually come back to you as sabotage or an uprising. The strategic master doesn't force people to obey. They seduce them into wanting to move in the desired direction.
The great Chinese strategist Zhuge Liang demonstrated this with the rebellious southern king Menguo. Liang had to subdue him, but he knew that traditional force would just lead to perpetual conflict.
So Liang captured King Menguo 7 separate times. And crucially, 6 times he released the king. He refused to fight him again until Menguo practically begged him to regroup and try again.
That cycle of defeat, followed by generous release, must have been psychologically devastating.
It was the ultimate psychological warfare. By the 7th capture, Menguo was completely broken, not by punishment, but by the sheer weight of Liang's superior strength combined with his boundless, life-giving generosity. Menguo, sobbing, finally swore eternal loyalty, saying, "How could we not yield?"
Liang won a willing subject, not a resentful captive.
Which is infinitely more powerful.
Finally, in this section, we have Law 44. Disarm and infuriate with the mirror effect. This technique uses the opponent's reality against them.
Mirroring an enemy's actions or psyche keeps them totally confused. They recognize the pattern, but they can't figure out why their own behavior is suddenly turned against them. The most powerful application is what the book calls the moral effect, demonstrating an idea through action by giving someone a direct taste of their own medicine.
The truth is often seen more clearly than it's heard.
Exactly.
Tell us the anecdote of the merchant, the friend, and the stolen iron. It crystallizes this perfectly.
A friend of a merchant stole a large amount of iron. When confronted, the friend made up this absurd lie, claiming that a rat in the room ate it all up. The merchant pretended to believe him. The next day, he invited the friend to dinner, but in the meantime, the merchant kidnapped the friend's child.
And the strategic payoff is in the explanation.
When the friend, furious, asked about his child, the merchant gravely explained that he knew of old that rats love iron extremely, and claimed that the iron-loving rat must have also stolen his child. It mirrors the friend's own absurd lie.
So the thief couldn't complain about the kidnapping without confessing to his own theft.
Correct. The merchant didn't argue. He objectified the friend's behavior, making him feel the result of his own conduct. The mirror effect is used to force realization, not just to score a tactical point. We can turn now to the highest levels of strategy, how power is maintained indefinitely in a world that's always changing. And this starts with protection, specifically Law 5. So much depends on reputation. Guard it with your life.
Reputation is the foundation. It's a shield, a psychological defense. Without it, you're helpless. P.T. Barnum learned this the hard way early in his career, trying to buy the American Museum.
Barnum was confident in his financial savvy, but he lost the deal. The partner explained pretty bluntly that the rival had a reputation and Barnum had none. That failure was a turning point. He realized reputation is a treasure that has to be actively cultivated and protected, especially when you're first establishing it.
And once it's solid, the strategy for dealing with slander becomes counterintuitive. You're told not to get defensive.
It's the high road. Getting defensive about slander only reveals insecurity and, in a way, validates the criticism. The confident individual, secure in their reputation, just maintains their dignity and stays silent. On the other hand, attacking another person's reputation is a very potent weapon, especially if you have less power because they have so much more to lose.
But reputation has a hidden weakness. It can breed silent envy. And this is why we have Law 46. never appear too perfect.
Perfection creates envy, and envy is. It's corrosive, destructive, and it's almost always disguised. The human animal is deeply disturbed by feelings of inferiority. When we see someone who seems to have superior skill in every single area, our own feeling of mediocrity can translate into a desire to sabotage them.
Sir Walter Raleigh, the brilliant courtier of Elizabeth I, suffered this fate. He was a warrior, a poet, a scholar. He was skilled in everything, and he made sure everyone knew it.
He thought his skills impressed people, but instead they created this massive pool of silent enemies who just felt inferior in his presence. These enemies waited for Raleigh to make one single minor mistake, and then they used any available cover, in his case, trumped-up treason charges, to completely ruin him. His flaw wasn't his skill, it was the sheer breadth of his perfect presentation.
So the strategic advice to deflect this is to deliberately display a minor weakness.
Yes, as Baltasar Gracian advised, display a harmless vice or some minor social mistake. This gives the envious something small and safe to feed on. It distracts them from your real achievements. Or, like Cardinal de Retz did after his promotion, you emphasize the role of luck in your success. If it seems lucky, it seems more attainable, and that mitigates the sting of inferiority.
The ultimate long-game strategy, though, has to be about survival in a constantly shifting world. Which brings us to Law 48. Assume formlessness.
A fixed shape, a visible, rigid plan. It just opens you up to attack because you become predictable and brittle. To survive long-term, you have to be fluid, adaptable, and accept that nothing is certain. Formlessness is survival.
The book contrasts ancient Sparta with Mao Zedong's military strategy to illustrate this.
Sparta was a hyper-rigid society. They sacrificed culture and mobility for extreme stability and military discipline. They created this fixed, predictable form. And over time, that system it grew brittle and it crumbled.
And Mao was the opposite.
Contrast that with Mao's formless guerrilla warfare. He used the vast, empty space of China to his advantage, keeping his forces constantly moving, decentralized, formless.
And he used that fluidity to break the enemy down.
Exactly. Mao's forces would let the nationalist armies take the cities, the fixed points, and then encircle them. If the nationalists sent reinforcements, Mao's forces, being fluid, would just encircle the rescuing army. Chiang Kai-shek's forces were slowly broken into these smaller, isolated units, which were then overwhelmed. Formlessness allowed Mao to exploit his enemy's rigidity.
And on a political level, Baron James Rothschild demonstrated this in 19th century Paris.
Rothschild survived the violently shifting political tides of France, monarchy, revolution, empire, republic, because he refused to adopt a rigid political form. He adapted seamlessly to every climate, never publicly committing to one ideology. He was valued for his money and his ability to finance power, not his politics.
He could appear hypocritical.
Or opportunistic, because he was the necessary currency of power. By not attaching himself to the past or a fixed ideology, he avoided the ruin that befell all these other wealthy families who clung to rigid, predictable forms.
This deep dive, it's a powerful reminder that the game of power often operates far beneath the surface, demanding strategic awareness over simple sincerity.
We've really analyzed the core strategic areas: the vital importance of perception over reality, the critical need to manage dependence and fear in relationships, the elegance of controlling the tempo of events, and that long-term survival strategy of formlessness.
In this material, as we've discussed, it's a clear-eyed analysis of historical truths, not a manual for ethical living. We go back to Machiavelli, that a prince who wants to keep his authority must learn how not to be good. The knowledge itself is neutral, but understanding how power works is vital.
And that strategic awareness leads us to a final, profound question for you, the learner, to think about. If true power demands mastering in direction, exploiting weakness, and sacrificing personal sincerity, does the attainment of absolute, unchallengeable power also guarantee ultimate isolation?
We saw this with Qin Shi Huangdi, the first emperor of China, the mightiest man of his day. He built the Great Wall, established the first unified state. And yet, in his final years, he lived in such a fortress of secrecy that few people ever saw him. He built a vast empire, but died utterly alone.
So does becoming the ultimate player in the power game require sacrificing the very human connections: friendship, genuine intimacy, honesty that define life outside that arena? Use this knowledge to better navigate the currents of influence you encounter daily, but, always ask yourself what the ultimate cost of that game might be.